The House chamber thrummed with restless energy as Representative Jasmine Crockett stepped up to the podium. The debate over national education funding had dragged on since morning, drawing sharp divisions across party lines. Cameras from C-SPAN swept across the floor, capturing clusters of lawmakers, some whispering with aides, others scrolling through phones, as the Texas Congresswoman adjusted her notes. "Mr. Speaker," she began, her voice steady and clear through the din, "I rise today to speak on behalf of the millions of students attending underfunded schools in communities too often forgotten by this body." She paused briefly, scanning the floor. "In my district alone, schools are struggling with broken infrastructure, decades-old textbooks, and insufficient support for special education programs. The proposal before us today threatens to make an already dire situation worse. This legislation would reduce federal education spending by 12%, cuts that fall hardest on children who already have the least." Before she could continue, a familiar voice pierced the air. "Will the gentlewoman yield for a question?" The cameras swiveled to capture Representative Matt Gaetz, leaning casually against his desk, microphone in hand, the faintest smirk on his face. Without waiting for her response, he pressed on. "I'm just wondering if the gentlewoman from Texas has actually read the bill she's so passionately denouncing, or if she's just reciting." Another set of partisan talking points. "Someone handed her this morning." A wave of murmurs rippled through the chamber. Even in an environment accustomed to sharp exchanges, the jab felt unusually personal. The speaker pro tempore glanced toward Crockett. "Does the gentlewoman yield?" Crockett's eyes flicked toward Gaetz. Her expression didn't waver. "I yield for a question," she said evenly. "Not a monologue." Her calm precision contrasted starkly with Gaetz's performative swagger. "Well then," Gaetz replied, feigning politeness, "perhaps the gentlewoman could educate us on which page of this legislation contains these alleged draconian cuts she's describing. Assuming, of course, she's read past the title page." The chamber stilled. The snickers from a few of Gaetz's allies faded as all eyes turned toward the Texas Congresswoman. For a moment she didn't move. Then she adjusted her glasses and looked directly at him. What happened next would dominate headlines for weeks and reshape both of their careers. "I thank the gentleman from Florida for his question," Crockett began, her tone measured yet firm. "To answer directly, yes, I have read the bill, all 341 pages of it. The education cuts begin on page 73, section 1042, and continue through page 189. They include a 22% reduction in Title I funding for low-income schools, the elimination of the Striving Readers Literacy Program, and a 17% cut to special education grants." She lifted a bound report from the podium. "I also have a district-by-district analysis of how these cuts will affect schools across America, including those in the gentleman's own district. For example, Escambia County in Florida stands to lose approximately $8.2 million in federal funding, directly impacting more than 15,000 students." The air in the chamber thickened. Lawmakers leaned forward in their seats. Even Gaetz's smirk faltered. Crockett wasn't finished. "Since the gentleman questions my preparedness," she continued, "perhaps we should examine his own engagement with this legislation." According to the official attendance records of the Education and Workforce Committee, Representative Gaetz missed 7 of the 9 meetings where this very bill was discussed and amended. The murmurs grew louder. "In fact," she went on, "the Congressional Research Service reports that the gentleman from Florida has missed 61% of his Education Committee meetings since taking office, one of the highest absence rates in the House." Gaetz's expression hardened, his earlier confidence draining as realization dawned. He hadn't derailed her speech. He'd walked directly into her trap. Crockett's tone sharpened just slightly. "Moreover, while the gentleman questions my knowledge of this legislation, the record shows that in 7 years of congressional service, he has not authored a single education bill that received a committee vote. Not one. The only piece of legislation he successfully sponsored is the renaming of a post office." The silence that followed was electric. A few members exchanged glances. The speaker raised a brow. When Gaetz tried to cut in, Crockett spoke before he could. "Mr. Speaker, I did not interrupt the gentleman when he spoke. I would appreciate the same courtesy." The Speaker nodded. Gaetz retreated, visibly irritated. "What's particularly troubling," Crockett continued, her voice rising just enough to fill the room, "is that while the gentleman accuses others of neglect, public records show he was hosting a fundraiser at Mar-a-Lago during one of this bill's markup sessions. In fact, Federal Election Commission filings confirm that he held 17 fundraisers during scheduled Education Committee meetings." She paused, allowing the weight of her words to sink in. "So yes, Mr. Speaker, I have read the bill. The more relevant question seems to be, has he?" The chamber erupted. Some gasped, others whispered. Even several Republican members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Crockett's tone softened again, composed and deliberate. "This isn't about party lines," she said. "This is about priorities. If we're serious about improving education, the work begins with showing up, reading the legislation, and understanding its impact, not grandstanding for social media clips." She turned another page of her notes, pivoting seamlessly back to policy. "Now, as to the so-called flexibility this bill claims to provide, let's clarify what that means. In Escambia and Santa Rosa counties, the gentleman's own constituents would face a 17% property tax increase just to maintain their current education services. That's the flexibility this bill provides. The flexibility to raise taxes or cut essential programs." The tension in the room was palpable. The Florida congressman remained silent. His earlier bravado evaporated. Across the aisle, even a few of his Republican colleagues appeared uneasy. Crockett's rebuttal continued, precise and unrelenting. She broke down the legislation's impact on rural schools, teacher training programs, and special education funding, citing exact sections, subsections, and data points. It wasn't performance, it was prosecution. As she neared the end of her allotted time, she placed her papers neatly on the podium. "Mr. Speaker," she concluded, "I came to this chamber to solve real problems for real families, not to perform for cameras." When members interrupt without having done the basic work of reading the legislation or attending committee meetings, they fail not only their colleagues, but their constituents. This isn't a stage, it's the United States Congress, and the American people deserve representatives who treat it as such. The room fell into an uncharacteristic quiet. There were no shouts, no applause, just an extended moment of stillness as members from both parties processed what they had just witnessed. A rare victory of preparation over provocation. When the session recessed for lunch, the chamber buzzed, not with partisan spin, but with quiet conversation about what had just transpired. Reporters swarmed into the corridors, microphones ready, hoping for comment from either side. Crockett offered a simple response. "Congress should be about substance, not spectacle. The people deserve the truth, and the truth takes work." As journalists turned toward Gaetz's office, they were met with silence. His aides claimed he had urgent meetings. For a man who typically sought cameras like a moth to flame, his absence spoke volumes, but the real shock would come just hours later, from inside his own party. As members filed back into the chamber after lunch, the atmosphere felt different. Conversations were hushed, glances quick and uncertain. What had begun as a routine debate on education policy had turned into one of the most memorable confrontations in recent congressional history. The Speaker called the session to order, but before proceedings resumed, a senior Republican from the Education and Workforce Committee requested recognition. His voice was calm but deliberate. "Mr. Speaker," he began, "in light of the detailed district impact data presented during this morning's debate, I believe our committee should reconvene to reassess several provisions of H.R. 4762 before proceeding to a final vote." The statement rippled across the floor like a shockwave. A member of the bill's sponsoring party openly suggesting a pause was nearly unheard of. Within minutes, 2 more Republican members rose to echo the call. "I've reviewed Representative Crockett's analysis," said one. "If these numbers hold, rural schools in my district stand to lose critical funding. I cannot support this bill in its current form." For the first time in months, the chamber witnessed bipartisan nods of agreement. The momentum had shifted decisively. By late afternoon, leadership quietly announced that the bill would be sent back to committee for revisions, an extraordinary reversal for legislation that had seemed destined to pass along strict party lines just hours earlier. Outside, the press corps erupted into a frenzy. News outlets across the political spectrum replayed Crockett's dismantling of Gaetz's challenge, frame by frame. Within hours, clips of the exchange flooded social media feeds, racking up millions of views. The hashtags Crockett Clapback and Substance Overshow trended for 2 straight days. For Matt Gaetz, the fallout was immediate. His press team scrambled to manage the narrative, but the story was already out of their control. Headlines in Florida papers cut through the spin. Showmanship versus substance. Did Gaetz fail his district? Crockett's data leaves Gaetz defenseless on education cuts. Attendance matters. Congressmen missed key hearings while fundraising. Local news stations in Pensacola interviewed teachers, administrators, and parents affected by the proposed cuts. Each segment highlighted the same point. While Crockett had brought hard numbers to the debate, Gaetz had brought nothing but rhetoric. Constituents began flooding his office with calls demanding explanations. Many wanted to know why their representative had skipped committee meetings that directly impacted their children's schools. Gaetz initially responded with familiar deflection. "This is just partisan theater," he told a conservative talk show host. "Democrats are twisting numbers to attack my record." But the data was irrefutable, and this time his usual allies in the media hesitated to defend him. One right-leaning commentator summarized the mood bluntly. "If you're going to challenge someone on the House floor, you'd better do your homework." Congressman Gaetz clearly didn't. The controversy reached a boiling point when the largest teachers' association in Gaetz's district issued a rare public rebuke, announcing plans to meet with potential primary challengers. The organization had never before taken a stance in a Republican primary. That move alone signaled political danger. In response, Gaetz announced an emergency town hall meeting in his district, a desperate attempt at damage control. But the event didn't unfold as planned. Gone was the swaggering, camera-ready performer. Instead, Gaetz arrived armed with policy binders and a subdued demeanor. He listened more than he spoke. When constituents questioned him about the education bill, he stumbled through explanations but avoided the showmanship that had defined his career. A local government teacher who attended the event later told reporters, "It was like watching someone realize, maybe for the first time, that being a representative actually means doing the work." Back in Washington, the Crockett effect was taking hold. The Education and Workforce Committee reconvened 2 weeks later to rework the education bill. Several amendments were added to restore funding for Title I programs, protect special education grants, and ensure literacy programs remained intact. Crockett's data-driven critiques were directly cited in the committee's report. When the revised bill returned to the floor for a vote, it passed with overwhelming bipartisan support, a rare outcome in a polarized Congress. Members on both sides privately credited Crockett's preparation for forcing a more honest debate. For her part, Representative Jasmine Crockett did not gloat. In interviews, she remained matter-of-fact. "Policy should be based on truth, not theater," she said simply. "If that's controversial, maybe the system needs more controversy." Her reputation in Congress soared. Senior members began inviting her to closed-door policy discussions, valuing her command of legislative detail. Freshman lawmakers sought her advice on how to prepare for floor debates. Within months, her staff became known for producing some of the most detailed policy memos on Capitol Hill. As one political analyst observed, Crockett turned preparation into power. In a chamber where sound bites used to rule, she reminded everyone that facts still matter. Meanwhile, Gaetz's troubles deepened. Investigative reporters began digging deeper into his record, uncovering patterns of absenteeism and underperformance stretching back years. National publications published scathing profiles comparing his media appearances to his legislative record. The numbers were damning. More TV interviews than committee meetings, more social media posts than sponsored bills. Then came the ultimate blow. A credible primary challenger. A retired Navy commander and former school board member announced his campaign to unseat Gaetz, declaring, "Our district doesn't need a performer. It needs a representative." His slogan was simple: representation over reputation. The challenger's message resonated. Local papers that once treated Gaetz as untouchable began running side-by-side comparisons of their records. The Pensacola News-Journal even launched a weekly accountability tracker, monitoring attendance and voting activity for all Florida representatives. By the time the primary arrived, the race was unexpectedly tight. When the votes were counted, the unthinkable had happened. Matt Gaetz, a once dominant incumbent, had lost by just over 3 percentage points. In his concession speech, he stood somberly before supporters. "I came to Washington promising to shake up the system," he admitted. "But somewhere along the way, I confused disruption with distraction. My constituents have reminded me that the work matters more than the spotlight." It was a rare moment of humility from a man long defined by defiance. The consequences of the Crockett-Gaetz confrontation extended far beyond the two lawmakers themselves. Political scientists began documenting measurable changes in congressional behavior. Committee attendance improved sharply in the months that followed. Members who had once skipped hearings to chase media appearances began showing up early and staying late. A nonpartisan study by the Congressional Research Foundation noted a 20% increase in the use of bill citations and policy references during floor debates. Representatives were becoming more substantive, more data-driven, and, perhaps most importantly, more cautious about picking fights they couldn't win on facts. In the media, commentators dubbed it the Crockett correction. High schools and universities began incorporating the viral exchange into civics lessons. In classrooms across the country, teachers used it as a case study in democratic accountability. "Students need to see that governance isn't about who shouts the loudest," explained one civics instructor. "It's about who does the homework." Representative Crockett showed what it looks like when preparation meets politics. The following year, during another debate on education funding, a freshman representative challenged a senior member's amendment by citing specific data and referencing bill language. Mirroring Crockett's method almost verbatim. When asked by a reporter where she learned that approach, the new congresswoman smiled. "I watched that Crockett-Gaetz exchange during my campaign," she said, "and I promised myself, if elected, I'd be a Crockett, not a Gaetz. The people deserve representatives who do the work." 2 years later, as the sun streamed through the Capitol's high windows during yet another education debate, that promise echoed across the chamber. Representatives on both sides now arrived armed not just with talking points but with data, facts, and research. A quiet evolution had begun, not through sweeping reform or scandal, but through one powerful example of accountability. As one veteran lawmaker put it, watching a new generation of representatives engage in serious debate. This place will always have performers. But now, thanks to that one Texas congresswoman, they all know the show doesn't last long if you don't know your lines or your legislation. And somewhere, in her office stacked with reports and binders, Representative Jasmine Crockett simply smiled, returned to her notes, and kept doing the work.